This is Art Space, a look at where art and outer space come together. I'm Roger Launius. I'm with the Space History Division of the National Air and Space Museum, a part of the Smithsonian Institution. This segment looks at everyone who's ever played music in outer space. This is the wake-up call on board the Space Shuttle Endeavour in 2001.
Dobre Utra, Endeavour and Alpha. That was Milenki, Timoy, and that was for Misha, Volodya, and Yuri.
Have you ever wondered when astronauts are in space what they do on their time off? They obviously are working most of the time, but they do have some time off, and they have to have time off to sleep, to relax, to exercise, and for some of them, especially in the last 15 years or so, to play music.
Well, since I left my baby, I found a new place to dwell. It's 400 kilometers in the air. It's called Space Station Alpha.
What you're hearing is Carl Walz, an astronaut who spent 6.5 months on the International Space Station. He's also a musician, and he plays in Max Q, which is an all-astronaut band based in Houston, Texas.
Another sunrise, another sunset, another orbit, another day out of this world.
Music is part of my life, and so if my life has moved to another location, music has to come along.
What to do in orbit on a Saturday night, all dressed up and nowhere to go.
Before he left for his mission, the NASA psychological team talked to Carl Walz. They asked him what he would need to survive effectively on the space station since he was going to be there for some 6 months. He asked them for a piano.
Playing keyboards is one of my hobbies, and so it was the first thing that came to mind.
And the psychologists who talked to Carl Walz agreed this would be something worth taking up. So when Endeavour blasted off, it held a Yamaha PSR 282 portable keyboard.
Taking musical instruments on a ship for an expedition is a tradition, if you will. And so I think it's what makes us human, is because we bring some of our home with us.
Bringing music into space is not new at all. What you're hearing is Wally Schirra playing a tiny harmonica on board Gemini 6 in December of 1965. His crewmate, Tom Stafford, took along a set of jingle bells, and they were the first ever musical duet in space. Stafford and Schirra played them 10 days before Christmas in 1965. There was also a lot of music in space during the Apollo program.
I was strolling on the moon one day in the merry month of December. May.
What you're hearing is Alan Shepard and Ed Mitchell singing while on the moon in 1971 during Apollo 14. When the shuttle program began in 1981, the astronauts had more capability to bring musical instruments with them into space and more room to play while they were on orbit. That's Ellen Ochoa playing the flute in Earth orbit. She did so aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery in 1993. She's the first Latina in space, and she's also a concert flautist. While NASA has allowed the astronauts to bring musical instruments into space, bringing them up can cause some problems.
Formaldehyde, benzene, or toluene. Some of the fluorinated species can be quite toxic.
What you're hearing is Mike Pedley, who until recently was given the task of making sure that all the musical instruments that flew into space were safe. He would check for all kinds of chemicals, all kinds of off-gassing, and any other sort of thing that might make a flute or a sax or any other instrument unsafe to fly in space.
They appear as a result of the manufacturing processes.
There's varnish on a guitar. There's lubricants and softeners that are used to keep flute keys flexible. All of the things that you rub on an instrument to make it sound good, none of these are a problem on Earth. But that's not true when you're on a space station or a space shuttle.
Well, they're a concern in space because you have a closed environment.
There's no place for the gases to vent. They just stay there in the cabin. They could build up and become toxic for the astronauts. So NASA has to take steps to defend against this.
We put the hardware into a closed chamber, heat it at 120 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days.
Researchers can take the instruments and try to speed up the release of any gases that might come out. They can sample what comes off, figure out how much is present and how much of it they can endure during the course of a flight. Guitars, of course, have a bit of a different problem. The spacecraft cabins have a lot more concentrated oxygen than you'd find on Earth. And that, of course, is why the Apollo 1 fire in 1967 took place, killing 3 astronauts.
Materials are a lot more flammable, so we're assessing to make sure it's not going to be flammable if it's left out in the environment on a permanent basis.
Anytime you play a guitar in space, you have to put it away inside a fireproof box. But playing music in space is not all that different from most of what takes place on the ground. Carl Walz, however, says that they did have to be very careful in picking out his keyboard.
If you got a keyboard that requires gravity to restore the keys after you push down on a key, okay, that's not going to work in space. And so I had to get a keyboard that had a spring action, otherwise the keyboard wouldn't work.
Zero gravity plays tricks on the pianist too, as well as on the piano. What you're hearing is Ed Lu, who lived on board the International Space Station for 7 months in 2003.
Playing the piano, basically you don't sit on a bench, you kind of float in front of it, floating next to the piano.
Lu says that's fine, that it's a pretty cool sensation, but it's a problem if you want to use the piano's pedal.
I was able to press the pedal, but what I was finding was that as I played the piano, you would be pushing on the keyboard, it would sort of push you away and you would begin to drift away from the keyboard. And if you pressed the pedal, it would sort of torque your body to the left. So you would find yourself slowly getting out of position until you just couldn't play anymore.
Of course, if you hit the piano keys too hard, you could flip over backwards. And when you try to play the guitar, sometimes your guitar pick could fly up in the air. But the ISS is pressurized just like at sea level at 14.7 pounds per square inch. And in that environment, sound travels pretty much the same as it does here on Earth. Your eardrums work just like they do here, and you can move your fingers at a normal speed. Ed Lu says that overall,
the way your body works, the way you swallow, the way your eyes work, all that other stuff is pretty much identical.
And the added advantage of playing a piano in space is you get a fantastic view.
There's a window which is next to the keyboard on the space station, and you can look out the window and watch the Earth outside go by. It's pretty neat.
It's moving to watch Ed Lu play Moonlight Sonata in space. He's jammed into a space station that looks about as big as a submarine. The walls are steel and covered with handles and paper and computer screens. But you know that outside those walls there's nothing. No light, no air, no water, and no life. But here's Beethoven flying through space. Here in one tiny place is the human drive to explore and the human ability to create. Two of humanity's greatest achievements, the International Space Station and Beethoven, floating together in the nothingness. Pretty neat, I'd say. Thanks for listening. I'm Roger Launius of the National Air and Space Museum for Arts Edge, a program of the Education Department of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts.